Hey, Bob the Vaping Computer Guy here. Today I'm going to teach you about coils. People ask me all the time, what kind of coil should I use? Should I use a standard Kanthal, nickel, titanium, stainless steel? What's the difference? What kind of power should I use it on? What about building my own coils? How does that work? I'm going to answer those questions for you today. I'm going to show you different coils. I'm going to show you how to build a coil, the basics of wicking it, how to install it, and I'm going to explain to you when you should use each kind of coil and the benefits to building your own or buying pre-made coils. So let's dive right down to the workbench, take a look at it, and then we'll come back and talk a little more. In vaping, understanding the different coil types and how to use them is important. Kanthal coils are the most popular type, and they will come in pre-made coils such as these, and they'll be all different sizes and shapes. You can also buy Kanthal metal for making your own coils. All right. Some of the other types of coils are nickel, which is one of the most popular types for temperature control, titanium, not shown here, and also stainless steel. And as you see when you're just looking at the wires, those are all going to look the same. All right. When buying pre-made coils, it's very important to make sure you get the right type. Depending on the coil you get for your tank, most coils, when they're Kanthal, don't say Kanthal, they just say what they are. 0.2 ohms and a recommended 55 to 70 watts, for example. This one will say 0.2 ohms, recommended 60 to 150 watts. And one more, 0.5 ohms, 50 to 70 watts. And what people call sub-ohming today, meaning your ohms, the ohm resistance of the coil, is less than 1. So you're sub-ohming. You'll also find coils that are 1.2, 1.8, and a variety of different resistances. Those, the one above 1, are more common for mouth-to-lung vapors. Mouth-to-lung vaping is typically more like a cigarette. You're not creating as much vapor, and you're not taking in as much into your lungs. You're taking it more into your mouth and then inhaling afterwards like you would with a cigarette. Where cloud vapors, people using the sub-ohm tanks, sub-ohm coils, are pretty much lung inhaling, where you're just taking a lot of the vapor right into your lungs, which gives you the maximum taste. It gives you the most vapor production usually on those type of coils, and you'll also find that if there's nicotine in the juice you're vaping, you probably get the biggest hit off the nicotine if that's what you're into. Now, one of the important things to note is when you're using Kanthal coils, the standard type of Kanthal that most vapors use, you can put them in and you can use them on any power that's not going to overheat the coil and burn your cotton. When using nickel and titanium, it's important to use them in temperature control mode. If you use nickel or titanium in regular power mode, also known as VW or variable wattage mode, you risk putting too much power to the coil, and nickel will give off toxic gases which are dangerous to inhale when you do that. So if you don't feel comfortable doing that and you're a beginner in vaping, I recommend not using temperature control nickel or titanium coils. Stick with Kanthal, and we'll get to how to get the best vape out of that shortly. Stainless steel, which is becoming more popular, actually can work in both power mode or temperature control mode, and you can get them both in pre-made coils more and more these days, and of course building your own with your own metal, and we will get to that as well. So let's clear this off. One of the important things to do when you get a coil is priming it. When you get a new coil, and these are used coils, but no matter what the coil looks like, if this was a new coil and it was dry, what you would want to do is get out your e-juice, alright, and before you put that coil in your tank, you want to get the cotton saturated inside. You would do that, and again, this is not going to absorb too well because this is a used coil, but you would put a couple of drops in there, drip around there, maybe coil this big, 5 or 6 drops until it gets really saturated. You take your coil and you screw it into your tank. And again, every tank is a little different. What you would do is now you would fill up your juice and you will let it sit for a while so that the cotton can continue to get saturated. Usually a minute, 2 minutes is more than enough. But at that point, you'd be ready to vape. Now, with these kind of coils that are pre-made that you're going to be using, the life expectancy of them varies quite a bit. Some people will find you get 4 or 5 days and then the taste is off, or you may accidentally put too much power and overheat your coils, in which case you'd want to replace them once you get a burnt taste, because once you burn the cotton a little bit, you're going to continue to taste that on there. Alright? Some people will find they get as much as a month out of a coil, and that's dependent on the coil, depending how you vape, how much wattage you use, etc. Now, while these coils are the most popular in the way most vapors vape, buying a coil, popping it in your tank, and using it until you need a new one, the downside is paying for them. They can be anywhere from $2 to $6 a coil. And if you're replacing them once a week, that's not too bad. Certainly a lot cheaper than cigarettes, but it can add up. What a lot of vapors do, the next stage of this hobby or alternative to smoking, is to start building your own coils. When you start building your own coils, that's where you start to get into a couple of things. You would need your Kanthal or other type of wire. You will also need cotton. Typically, what's used today is Japanese organic cotton. This is not the same cotton that you buy to remove makeup or at drugstore. This cotton is unbleached with no chemicals. Now, to show you some building of your own coils, normally you would use either a stand, such as this small one here, to hold a device, or you can actually just use a mod, although you want to make sure it's off or has no batteries in it, because if you accidentally apply power when working with this metal, you can burn yourself. Now, when you're building coils like this, there's a couple different ways. The most common type is called a dripper. Alright, this is a dripper, and as you can see, it has 2 coils in place already. The way a dripper works is you have your device here, you'll have your coils, 1 or 2 or more, you'll have cotton in here, which we will get to and I will show you, and then you have a top cap. What you typically do is remove the top cap, put a few drops of your juice right onto your cotton. As you see, it's not a tank, it does not hold a lot. You pretty much saturate the cotton and maybe put a little extra that sits in the juice well in the bottom. Then you cover it and you vape. The advantages to doing this is taste. Taste is much better, in my opinion, and in that of many vapors, compared to using tanks. The downside, or the other upside from it, is cost. Where these coils can cost you, this one is about $3.50, $4 a coil. The cost of a spool of wire of 100 feet is usually under $10. And a bag, like I showed you, of cotton, which is a lot of cotton, alright, is typically about $15. Between the two, one coil, making it yourself and using your own cotton, can probably cost you about 10 cents. So the cost difference is enormous, but there is time involved in doing this, and you do have to know a little bit more about what you're doing. Alright, so let's go ahead and take this. I'm going to remove these coils that are in here now so we can show you how to put a new coil on. Okay, with the coils removed, you can see in here, and every one is going to be different. There's a lot of different styles of what they call decks, which is what you're building your coil on. You can see the size of the holes vary, the type of screws from using Allen wrench keys to Phillips to flatheads like this one varies. So you can see here, this one allows you to build typically 4 coils. A coil here, and the same on both sides here. We're just going to build 1 coil just to give you the idea of how to build. So I'm going to attach this to my mod, and again I recommend you do this on a small building deck or a larger building deck, or remove your batteries unless you're confident that you know what you're doing. My device is actually off at the moment. We'll move that off so I can show you about building the coils. There are a few different ways of building coils. For starters, you have tools that you'll need. Usually you'll need a screwdriver, and some people use drill bits, and this is what you would wrap your coil around. With drill bits, the advantage is you can know the diameter. You can get 1/16, 1/8,
inch, or any size to build your coils on. There are many charts online, many websites. If you search for vape coil charts, you'll find many sites that talk about if you take, for example, 24 gauge Kanthal wire and you put it around a 1/8 inch drill bit and you do 10 wraps, they might tell you that's going to be 0.5 ohms. So if you're trying to reach a certain resistance, and you'll learn why the resistance is important later, then you can follow those charts and do it. I pretty much just build by experience. I'll just take one of the screwdrivers or tools that I use often, make a certain number of wraps, and just go with it. I find whether it's 0.4 or 0.5 is not going to make a big difference for the way I vape, and probably not for you either, unless you're really into cloud competitions, learning how to get the biggest clouds, or really getting into just understanding it better as a hobby. Other tool you'll need is a good pair of cutters and some long nose pliers. Needle nose pliers would be very helpful. Let's take some Kanthal wire, and this stuff tends to unspool quite quickly, so try and keep it wrapped up. I'm going to probably cut a little more than I need here just for demonstration purposes. Now, one way is take your bit, take your wire, and I usually hold it with my thumb, and I bring the first wrap real close in. And then I just go around getting as close so it's touching, so it's a perfectly tight wrapped wire. And I'm not going to do this perfect on camera, it's always harder to do on camera. Now, normally when I do that and concentrating on it, it will come out a lot more uniform of a coil. Now, if you really want to be able to do a better job, you can straighten out your wire. I'm going to cut off what we made here. You can get many different devices that they have. This is one example. As you insert this, you hold it down. And that little nub in there, when you push this up against it, start to wind the wire, and then you slowly come back so you're not putting too much pressure on it. And as you see, that gives you a very nicely wound coil. Straighten out that piece of wire, and you can pull it off, and there is a very nicely wound coil. Now, you'll also find people like to vary the coil by doing things like stretching it out. And that kind of spaced out my coil a little bit. Not perfect, but it can be worked on. And you'll find different techniques. Some people like them tightly wrapped together, some people like them spaced like this. Some people will swear one produces better flavor than the other, or greater clouds than the other. Your experiences with this will vary, and this is just personal preference. Now, keeping for this particular build deck that we're going to use, we're going to keep both leads of the coil facing the same way. So there you go with a finished coil, which we can tweak and make a little better later. Now, as you can see with a deck like this, the wires are going to go in such as this, and you can end up, what you do is you have a positive post and a negative post, and one lead obviously goes in one goes in the other. So we can take this wire, snip it a little shorter to make it easy to work with. Since we're only going to use this one, you can place it in there, hold it in the approximate position, and tighten down our screws. Now, it will take practice, and I'm doing this quickly here, for you to learn how much of a lead leads to put in. Obviously, we're going to want to manipulate that and make it straighter, and you can use the same tool that you used because it'll fit in perfectly. You can do things like that, get it straight. A lot of times you'll want to build that more towards the center, and you do that obviously by making this lead longer and then moving it over more. I can show you that. But it does become a skill and an art to be able to get the coils exactly how you want them, where you want them. All right. But you would leave that lead a little longer, be able to move the coil over more, and obviously when you put in, normally what you would do is you would tighten the single one down on this side, but not tighten the center, because any other coils you build will also have to have a lead go in the center. And then when you're done, you would tighten down the center lead to make everything straight. Now, with Kanthal coils, there's some controversy on whether or not you should dry burn the coil. What you can see I'm going to do here is cut off this extra metal here. You certainly don't want that there. And watch your eyes. Alright, so there's your coil. Now what I'm going to do is turn my device on. Alright, and I'm on 25 watts, which is not a lot of power at the moment. But what we want to do is heat up the coil. And you can see there how it's burning pretty evenly. Focus for you. Now again, that's not the most beautiful coil, but it gives you the idea. And the reason for this is to make sure that nothing is shorting, to make sure that the coil, more than anything, is heating up uniformly. You don't want hot spots. Sometimes you'll do this and you'll find that one spot on the coil is hotter than the rest. And the problem with that is you're going to burn your cotton in that spot because you're not getting even distribution of the heat. Alright, also you can see that it does change color a little bit. It's almost like you're burning off the outer layer of the metal. Although Kanthal, from my understanding, is safe to just start using right away. But I learned it this way, so that's the way I continue to do it. And you'll find most people do it this way, I believe. Now, at that point, usually people will try and manipulate the coil, make these more even using a small screwdriver. Try and just get them to even out, straighten them up, make them look better. It gets to be, pride for some people to have everything, looking and working just right. But that's pretty good. Also, if you were to use multiple coils, you want to make sure that they're the same amount of wraps, because if you put a coil here, and by the way, you can see this one is coming out to 0.8 ohms. 0.81 to be exact. If I took another coil of the exact same amount of wraps, exact same size, and put it on the other side, now the electricity from the battery gets through twice as fast because it's going through this coil and this coil. So your resistance is cut in half. So if I took another coil like this, same amount of wraps, same size, put it on the other side, I would end up having a 0.4 ohm vape instead of 0.8 right now. Right, but we're going to leave it like this for demonstration purposes. The next thing you're going to want to do, and you can see my wire just jumped all over the place, is to wick this. Now again, that's also something that just takes practice. If you were to take your cotton, cut off a strip, and if you notice, there are two directions to cotton the way they make it. It's very strong this way, but it's not very strong this way. Okay? This way, strong. This way, weak. You want to cut it the long way so that when you're holding it like this, it's strong. Alright? Now, some people will find they will take off the outer layers of this. You will find that the outside of it is a little thicker, a little stronger, and the inside, as you can see, is more airy and light. I usually take off one side. And what I do is I grab the cotton, twist one side, and then feed that through. And of course, the coil is now cool because it's been sitting there for a little bit. Now it also becomes pretty much an art in knowing how tight to have this. If you have it too loose, the cotton will the coil will not make good contact with the cotton, and you will probably burn your cotton and not get a very good vape. If it's too tight, the juice will not be able to seep through into the cotton that is inside the coil, and then that'll be a problem. This one is actually a little tight, so I'm going to take off a little bit of cotton, which is of course quite easy to do. Okay, you see it pulls pretty, it's a little bit of snug, but it pulls through pretty easily. Just cut that off. Cut that off. Now how much you use, how much you stuff in there. Some people like to have it just short enough so it's just touching the bottom of the deck so that it'll absorb the cotton. Other people like to stuff a lot in there. This is personal preference. Some people will swear that one way is the only way to do it, and some people will swear the other way is the right and only way to do it. I say do whatever works for you, experiment, have fun with it. Now this might be a little long, because as you can see I stuffed quite a bit in there. And you want it to be loose. You don't want it packed down tight, or it's going to have a problem absorbing juice. Now if we fire it now, we will burn that cotton and set it on fire, so we're not going to do that. But if we take some of our juice, what you want to do is saturate that. And I usually put a little bit on first, let it soak in, put a little more, let it soak in. You can still see there's some spots in the back there that are white and dry. You really want to make sure it's all soaked in. And of course make sure you're getting it on the coil so you know that in there is nice and wet. Alright, as you can see it's starting to drip around the side and the back there, so you know we're doing pretty good. Now at that point, if we fire it, now if you watch when I press the button, it's pretty good because it's heated now, but we're only at 25 watts. Now for a 0.8 ohm coil, that's probably fine. The higher the resistance, the less power you end up needing to get a good vape, and if you put too much power, you can overpower it, burn out your cotton. You'll find that if you're sub-ohming down to 0.2, 0.3, you can go into much higher. You can go to 50, 80, 100 watts of power. But it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the type of coil. It depends how much cotton. It even depends on the type of juice. And I'm not going to get into the differences with juice, but research on what's called PG and VG, and you'll learn about different kinds of juice. Then your temperature, can affect that. So it's an experiment. Right now the coil's a little cooled down. If I fire, you can see that delay before it heated up. Most people don't like that. They want it to get a vape right away. Otherwise you start inhaling, and what you're getting is air in the beginning, cool air, and not the vape juice. So let's pump that up to 40 watts. And you don't have to be exact, but now if I fire it, much faster. Okay? And you can see that's burning well. Now this is the difference though between Kanthal and nickel and titanium and stainless steel in temperature control mode. If I continue to hold this button, this mod will fire until all the juice runs out, and then that coil will burn the cotton, maybe even set it on a little fire. When you're using temperature control on nickel and Kanthal and stainless steel, nickel and titanium and stainless steel, you can actually tell it to not go above a certain temperature, let's say 400 degrees, and then when you're firing, it will continue to fire until it runs out of juice, but then it will be able to sense that there is no more juice evaporating and the coil is exceeding that temperature, and it will shut down. That is the advantage of temperature control. So let's go ahead and show what it's like to work with a different coil, such as nickel. So I've done some quick cleanup and removed the coil that was in there. Alright, you can still see there's probably a little bit of juice on there. That's okay for our demonstration purposes. Let's go ahead and take a look at some nickel. Here is nickel 26, here is nickel 28 gauge. Of course, the lower the gauge, the thicker the wire. Right? Problem with working with nickel, it is more difficult, and the reason is it is a much softer metal, and the softer metal tends to bend much easier. As you can see, it doesn't even unspool, okay, because it stays in position better. Taking nickel wire, let's wrap it around our screwdriver here. Typically, when using temperature control, you do not want the coils wound tight. You want them spaced out and not touching. The main reason for this is, in order to allow the device to properly detect the temperature, you want it to be almost like if you took this and put this in these two leads in. It's one wire not touching, and it's able to detect the changes in the resistance as it sends power through it, and that's how it can tell the temperature. If you have it wound in a tight coil, if this was in a tight coil like this, well, when it's spaced out, electricity travels through the whole coil till it gets to the other end, and it helps it to detect the temperature based on the resistance. If you have this where it was tightly packed together, well, now your electricity doesn't need to go in a spiral to get to where it needs to go. It can go up to the top here, and touching the other metal, it can pretty much travel straight across. Okay, and that inhibits how well it's going to be able to detect the resistance and the temperature, because the resistance is not going to be as accurate as if the wire was one spooled piece of wire that wasn't touching. Let's go ahead and take some on here, and what I recommend doing when you do this is you can wind it around, and again, on camera this is more difficult, so I'm just giving you a rough idea. And you can wind it this way. Now you can see we have a coil that is, for the most part, not touching. And you can space it out. Now, even transferring this coil to the device is more difficult with a softer metal, because it is much more likely to bend and touch and get deformed. Another way of doing it, new piece of wire, is to actually wound it tightly where it is touching, is to wind it where it is touching and then stretch it out. Okay? And then again, you have to be more careful not to damage the wire with these softer metals, because it does bend very easily. So we go back to our device. Basically, we're going to do the same thing. As you can see, the act of just tightening the screws deforms the coil. So it really does take a steady hand and practice to get it where you want it. Right. Now, there's also controversy about whether or not you should dry burn temperature control coils such as nickel. I'm of the school that you should dry burn it very slightly, just in case there's any coatings on there to get it off. So I'm going to lower my power down to about 15 watts. Now, I'm still in power mode, but I'm doing very low power. I'm just going to try pulsating a little bit. As you see that, see how the color changed and it seemed to almost burn off an outer layer? So that's all I would do, and that's it. At that point, you would switch your device to temperature control, put your cotton in there, and let me give you an example about what will happen in temperature control. Now if you look at my device, I'm in temperature control. This is a 0.1 ohm coil. Okay, you'll notice that the same amount of wraps in Kanthal was a 0.8. So the metal is much different, and you end up having to do a lot more wraps. You couldn't put 2 coils in most tanks, most devices, because now if I put another 0.1 over here, it cuts my resistance down to 0.05. And while more and more devices today can control temperature control down to 0.05, a lot can't. So now I actually put it on a new device because my battery was dying. But as you can see here, I have it on here. Saturated with juice now, have some cotton in there. I'm just putting enough to show you for testing. On this device it's actually reading 0.18 ohms. I'm at 400 degrees, Ni for nickel mode, and I'm at about 30 watts of power. And let's take a look and see what happens. Okay, I'm still holding. 10 seconds went by, so the device shut off automatically. Protection. See when it says protection in there? Watch again. That's where it's cutting down the power because it's detecting that there was no juice left on it. One more time. Alright. So it didn't continue to burn. And if you look at the cotton, you might have some slight scorching on there, but for the most part it's undamaged. Try doing that with Kanthal and you will simply burn the cotton until it catches fire. Now, how to start using a new coil when you're not experienced to know what kind of power you should use it on. Let's assume you're using a standard nickel coil that you bought and installed in a tank, such as one of these or this one. Every coil, well, most coils these days, put ratings on the side. They'll tell you 30 to 60 watts, 50 to 100 watts. Always start on the lowest setting if you're not familiar with the coil, if you haven't used it before and don't know what is a good power setting to use. The coil I have in here right now, let's say we didn't know a rating, is a 0.58 ohm coil. Okay, so we're going to start low. Let's start at 20 watts. And again, we're in standard power mode with the standard coil. Now you can hear it. It is vaping, but you don't know until you actually try it how good of a vape it's going to be. You may find you're getting very low vapor production. When I try this, I'm finding I'm getting next to no vapor. So I pump it up to 25 watts. Try again. And you can hear it's a little higher power. And that's better, but still not where I'd want to be. So you can increase the power a couple of watts at a time, 5 watts, 2 or 3 watts, until you get it to the point where you like the vape. If at any time you get the slightest burnt taste, back the power down, because if you burn that coil, you will end up throwing it out and wasting a few dollars and having to put a new coil in. As I said before, typically you'll find that coils in the 1.2 or 1.8 ohm range, you can vape as sometimes as little as 10 watts, 15, 20 watts, and they give a very satisfying vape equivalent to a cigarette. When you start getting down to the 0.5, 0.3, 0.2, that's when you find that you might use 30, 50, 80, 100 watts. For most people, I find that I talk to, 30 to 50 watts is common and will give you a very satisfying vape on many of the coils today. Another thing you'll find with temperature control is that it varies from device to device. You may have a device that you put a coil that you built on, and or even a store-bought temperature control coil, and find that at 25 watts and 350 degrees, it's great. You take it and you put it onto a different device, and there are many devices out there these days. They are not all consistent. They are not all the same. you will find that depending on what you use, you will find the temperature needs to be a little higher, a little lower, and you will constantly be varying these things to get what you want.
So I hope you learned something today about coils and the importance of understanding temperature control and standard Kanthal coils. Also, if you're new to vaping, please, please, please search for videos on batteries and learn about batteries. When you hear bad things happening to people in the news with their vaping device, it is almost always, maybe always, because of the batteries. The wrong type of batteries is very dangerous. So please research that and look into it. My recommendation for coils: if you're a new vapor, go with Kanthal coils. Don't go into temperature control. There's still controversy over whether it's safe. If you end up taking a nickel coil and putting it on a device and you forget to switch it to temperature control mode, or for some reason it switches itself out of temperature control mode and you put it into power mode and you press the button and fire it at a high wattage, the toxic gases are known to come off of those wires and you will be inhaling that. And we all know that's not safe. So if you're not too comfortable with it and you're not that experienced, stay with Kanthal coils. Buy them in the store, pre-made, and try them that way. Building your own. With drippers, which is where, again, like I showed you that we built on, where you're dripping your juice on there and you got to continually drip every after every few hits that you take of the device, you get the best taste. Some people will say that the newer tanks today are equivalent. Most experienced vapors I know will disagree with that, including myself. I think you get the best taste possible off of dripping. Now, a lot of the newer tanks that today have what's called RBA, or rebuildable sections, where you can actually build your own coil and put it into the tank. And then the tank holds the juice and it actually goes through small holes to the wick and works that way. That is an in-between. It is in between buying pre-made coils. You can build your own, but you're still using a tank. That's the most convenient thing for when you're out on the road, at work, driving the car. Use the RBA section of tanks to build a coil, if that's what you want to do. Put it into those tanks and use it that way. Hope I answered most of your questions, and if you have any comments, please post them below. If you're not a subscriber of mine, please click subscribe and watch some of my other videos as well. Thanks a lot. Wait! Don't leave! If you haven't subscribed already, please click on that subscribe button. Also see some of my other videos that are listed below, right down here, or that subscribe button up there. Subscribing doesn't cost you anything, but it does help me to bring you more videos. So if you haven't subscribed, please click that button. And thanks for watching.